Chapter 19. By the time I finished up at Luli's, I had a shiny silver coin in my pocket and my cooking rank had increased to 16. Not bad for a couple hours' work. But as I viewed the high spires of the academy in the distance, my lungs deflated. Despite my employer's encouraging words and the logic supporting them, the usually positive frame of mind for which my father had often complimented me had fallen by the wayside. And with good reason. But when I reached the guards at the main academy gate, I raised my chin, strolled by like I belonged there, then made a beeline for the dorm. I counted myself lucky I'd shared a noodle soup with Luli before setting out, so I wouldn't have to suffer hunger pangs as I lounged in my dorm until the knock I dreaded came at my door. I lit the wick of the candle rod with the torch in the hallway, opened my dormitory room, then lit the candles in the chandelier hanging in the center of the space. The knock came 1 minute after I returned the rod and closed my door. Shivers of dread coursed through my body. As a final thought, I slid the key to the Worcester study under my dresser, where it clanked against the wall. When the door swung wide, Shabana stood in the opening. Although she'd betrayed me, the sight of her face brought relief. If nothing else, maybe I could garner a report as to the state of things. I pulled the door wide and gestured for her to enter. She eyed the bed. After I nodded, she sat on its edge. Her hands dropped to her lap and she twiddled her fingers. What I did today was wrong. In my efforts to make friends and get along, I betrayed the one friend I should have cared about. Her gaze remained pinned to her knees. When I heard what happened after I slid you the key, I was horrified. Her chin came up. Were you hurt? I shook my head. No, but he was. Yes, I know. How did you find out? I kept my tone level, non-committal. The Michonne wasn't off the hook yet. I still needed to draw her in on my line, like fish from the lake near the farm. He came looking for you. He banged on your door so the whole hall heard. Was he a bloody mess? She nodded. Only his clothing. Must have been a real gusher. But his face was clean? Shabana nodded. Someone must have healed him. That or he had a potion. What did he want? The key. I'd promised to only borrow it to release you. He expected to have it back. Of course I didn't care. And you think that proves your loyalty? That you came around in the end? Her head dropped again. Not in the least. To tell the truth, I'm surprised you let me in. My shoulders hunched. I let you in because I need to know if I'm being expelled. Oh, she nodded. That makes sense. I probably wouldn't have let the traitor inside either. She stood and trudged toward the door. You're leaving? She turned and pressed her back to the wall. Yes, I should give you time to reflect. I haven't earned your trust and I regret it. I don't expect forgiveness because my people taught me better, and never have I had occasion to act so poorly, not even as a child. I deserve whatever punishment the goddess deems necessary to correct my ill-rendered decisions. When she raised her head again, I saw the beginnings of liquid pooling in one eye. She was making it really hard to stay mad at her with this display of repentance. If it helps you rest easy, I've heard nothing from the other students about your conflict below, and I only learned of it when I came into the hallway while Johin was here. He turned his rage on me, but dared not act on it. I don't know who else heard, but it is the first day of classes, and I doubt the students in this dorm will want to get involved. I hope you're right, but it still leaves me the problems of Johin and Elrin. Elrin. She feigned spitting on the floor. Even worse than the first. What the master at the foundation calls a confidence man. He postures and presents an easy face to a door, then shows his serpent stripes when it suits his nefarious purpose. At least we agreed there. Whether or not I earn back your friendship, you should know I will pray to the goddess, and with every opportunity presented, I will watch your hindquarters for threats from these man-boys. If you face them in a dark corner, you will not face them alone. She cocked her head toward my staff in the corner. Since we attend Constitution class each of the 5 days during the week, you're expected to carry your weapon. Keep it close. Although I doubt Johin will be so brazen as to attack you and risk expulsion with his father's reputation in jeopardy, I wouldn't let my attention veer far from Elrin should you catch sight of him. She bowed so deep, I saw the backs of the ears that rested atop her head. Then she stood erect. May you forever be contented in the light. Shabana slipped out the door, then latched it behind. I snatched my staff and set it against the wall next to my bed. Then I retrieved the key, tucked it inside a peach wrap Luli'd been kind enough to gift me, then slipped the wrapping in the back of my bottom drawer. The drawer shut with a bang I hadn't intended. I shot up, my back straight, then stared at the door. You're being paranoid. Shut up, I muttered to myself. Minutes passed while I paced there, fretting like a mischievous child awaiting her scolding. The twin moons had risen and cast their lights onto the field out the window, but my gaze wandered past them to the wall of stone bricks north of the academy. It was too early to sleep. The goddess's star only an hour past the horizon, and a new thought arose from the silence. No one would see you coming or going. No chance you'd be spotted if you moved the rest of the tomes and scrolls tonight. Maybe the honorable thing to do was report my findings to the academy. I could go to Magister Lyra or Master Roshan with what I'd found, but I remembered the dusty shelf fronting the secret door and what I'd come to think of as the Worcester's study, and drew the conclusion they'd already cleaned the place of the documents they'd known about. What would they do with the ones I'd found? What about the scrolls? A voice rang out in my head, neither male nor female, droll in tone.
How will you avenge your father if you give up these sources of power? I am with you, Tess, and I forbid it.
I should have been horrified at the voice's new proclamation. It confirmed it didn't resonate from my own thoughts. Maybe it proved my father and our farm weren't the only things of value I'd lost. Perhaps my mind's total collapse into insanity wasn't far behind. If I spent half the night moving the tomes, I'd answer for it in an exhausted state the following morning. My gaze fell away from the moonlit night as I considered another possibility. I could scan the readable tomes and add them to my interface library. Although I'd read some books my father brought back from trades with the people of Guinness Peaks, most of my knowledge came from tomes he transferred to my Mind Windows library. Just because the runes printed in 1 or 2 books wouldn't transfer didn't mean they all wouldn't. If I was going to haul anything through the high grass of the northern fields, the scrolls needed to be protected. The idea I could learn abilities from them, bide my time, avoid notice, and advance faster than those around me to abbreviate my hunt for the demon murderer and destroyer of my home? The one tome with the scryer's notes in the margins jumped to the front of my mind. It promised a sufficiently advanced magician the ability to seek out others. If that included demons, it could serve my long-term purpose. I'd already moved that one to the cave where it would be safe. But what other treasures in the study might need protecting? Did the Worcester's leave behind more advanced books on the method? More tomes with runes preventing transfer to my interface? I needed to find out. The realization helped a plan form. Those that could be transferred to my library would be. Then I'd move the rest. But first, I needed to scan them all to find out which I could read, then prioritize moving those I could transfer. But the scrolls will give direct power boosts. Those must be the top priority. On the one hand, I could use the scrolls as I ranked up. On the other, my skill in rune crafting would eventually grant me the ability to read the books whose pages appeared as runic scribbles. Scrolls, direct magic enhancement, books, long-term knowledge that could enhance my power. Then again, half the tomes could be historical in nature. The scrolls planted by the Elven Queen for the worthy, whoever that was, to find someday had undoubtedly been swept away by the dark being who once resided beneath the academy, then hidden from those who might use them for the light's purpose. Only this theory made sense. After all, in such a devilish place as the Plague Barrens, darkness prevailed, and I'd have wagered if this Worcester could enter the Blighted Lands and recover them, he must have been a dark being indeed. But if the scrolls proved of elven construction, they would undoubtedly help me serve noble purposes. Perhaps I would prove to be worthy. I returned to the window as my plan formulated and solidified. From the second-story windows, the shadowy forms of the rocky foothills on the other side of the wall crept skyward. I estimated the distance to the cave. If I waited just a couple hours, most students would be asleep. Then I'd set out. If the trouble nagging at the back of my mind came knocking at my door before I left, I'd deal with it then. To worry about what I couldn't control hadn't been my nature on the farm, and I saw no reason to torture myself. But I snuffed out the candles so the flickering light under my door wouldn't unnecessarily invite visitors. With the bright lights of the moons flooding through my massive windows, I didn't even need my seeing spell. The larger white moon hovering in the sky captured my attention as I perched on the wide sill and waited for the clock to tick in my favor. Then my gaze shifted to the field. Motion. I leaned forward. Had someone been there? 2 orange embers appeared. When I squinted, I made out a figure. The embers glowed where his eyes should have been. My heart jumped into my throat and raced madly. My chest hitched. My knees quivered. I cast my seeing spell, but by the time the world burst into simulated daylight, I already knew what I'd see. It was him, the obsidian-skinned demon with the same crystallized eyes who killed my father as his minions burned our farm around him. I shook my head, blinked my eyes, but the demon still stood there, his chin cocked high, peering in my direction. "You will die for what you did, evil one." The figure thrust its hands out to its sides. A violet glow swept from its shoulders, down its arms, then eventually bloomed around its hands. Loose clumps of grass-topped soil popped into the air. Clawed hands reached up from the holes. When the orange-fleshed minions hauled themselves from the depths, my lip rose into a high sneer. I snatched my staff, then charged into the hallway without closing the door. When I took to the spiral staircase closest, my foot slipped, tweaking my ankle and sending a shock of pain up my leg. "You have twisted your ankle, causing an injury. Duration, 5 minutes. I gave it preferential treatment the rest of my descent, and when I reached the floor, it took about half my weight without complaint, so I limped until I reached the outer doors of the library. They didn't relent when I tried to barge through them, and I groaned. Flipping the latch on the lock, I burst into the night. "Your ankle injury is worsening due to activity. Duration, 9 minutes. I sped across the cobblestones the best I could. "Contessa of Milbury!" My shoulders jumped, then locked themselves near the sides of my head. When I tried to stop, I planted the wrong foot, then tumbled to the cobblestones. As I raised my head, I glared toward the center of the field. Empty. The figure who'd called out blocked the moon as she shuffled into view. I didn't need to look up to identify her. The accent had given her away. Roshan's shadowy face peered down. "What in Salada's world are you doing?" One hand shot toward me and I flinched. Then the sides of her mouth twitched downward. Her next words came in a whisper as she drew the hand she'd offered as assistance away. She bent toward me and cupped her knees. "Tess, what is it?" I glared past her into the field, and the priestess noticed. Her head swiveled, then she repeated herself. "What is it?" I would never understand what brought the words from my lips, and they came without measurement. "The demon who killed my father." I pushed myself up to my knees. "I saw him there." She wheeled around. "Where? I will summon the defenders." She raised her hands. A cold sensation washed over my body, and I shivered violently. My ankle twisted back into its proper seat with a sudden burst of pain. Then the discomfort withdrew. Roshan casts Flash Heal, Overheal, plus 90 HP. Critical bonus, plus 15 HP per second for 15 seconds. Your injury has healed. To wield such power. "Tess!" Roshan grabbed one shoulder to yank me to my feet. "Where is this demon? We will see it vanquished." "You believe me?" Her eyebrows knitted together and her forehead wrinkled. "Demons are not new to me. Tess, if you saw one, you saw one. Where?" She thrust the black knotted staff in her hand toward the field. "There?" I nodded. "He's gone." "How do you know he was the same one who killed your father?" "Because he summoned low orange demons who burned our home to the ground. I would know them anywhere." "Are you cold?" "No." My confused response came more like a question. "You shivered when I healed you." One eyebrow dropped, but the other remained arched. "It's chilly out here and I just saw a demon." How easily I lie. "The goddess frowns on your dishonesty with her faithful servant. You have lost 5 light points. Note, your light disposition affects how others feel when within your aura of influence. Current disposition, neutral. Current rank, light, -5, -250. Next threshold, untrusted." Great, just what I needed. Roshan's eyes jerked to the staff over my back. "I'll call out the defenders to scour the campus. You should return to the dorm until we've cleared the area." "But..." I stopped myself, knowing my arguments to participate would gain no traction, but other options existed. "Could I go to the chapel?" Roshan nodded. A fine idea. No demon would dare violate the home of the goddess's faithful. She grasped my shoulder. If this demon pursues you, we will see to its demise. You must have faith in us. Her response lent the sense the priestess saw a flicker in my expression, that she knew I wanted to help hunt the demon down but had given in. Maybe I'd shown her I wasn't a petulant child, which could work in my favor. Although it hadn't been my plan when I rushed from my room moments before, I now had an excuse to get on with it. A pang of guilt about hiding my true intentions from the priestess of the light had its moment in my chest, but a deep breath relieved it enough for me to speak. Thanks, Master Roshan. When I'm a higher level someday, I will defend the meek against demon kind. Roshan nodded. Yes. She clipped the word and shooed me. Now go. The door behind me slammed open, then 4 men in plate armor burst into view. They carried long pole arms with shining silvery axe blades backed by spikes. Roshan turned, waving the soldiers toward her. In the field. Master During is on his way to aid us, but we shouldn't wait. The priestess pointed her staff the direction she wanted them to go, then fell in behind them. She raised the weapon. It glowed green, then semi-transparent bubbles engulfed the group. My jaw dropped. I mentally captured the image of her, surrounded in protective magic, her robe sweeping the ground as if she floated. I fast-walked toward the chapel. If I was quick enough, I could complete my task and be back before Roshan noticed I was gone. Chapter 20. I strained to haul the grate up, then cast my inner illumination spell so I could find my footing on the ladder below. When I reached for the grate, I recalled my trouble raising it alone when Johan pursued after our altercation, then the way he'd struggled to lift it from above, which delighted me. Weakling. If I hurried, I could get my work done, hurry back, and wait in one of the pews for Roshan to return from her search of the campus. Although I doubted they'd find the demons I'd seen summoned from below the ground, the priestess's demeanor and the way she hadn't questioned my sighting of the evil minion of Hokram had told me she'd scour the academy grounds before she relented. Then you lied to her. At least their hunt would buy me time. At the bottom of the ladder, I peered in both directions, then hustled to the right. The metal bars appeared only a minute later, which was quicker than I'd expected. Fast was good. It put the odds in my favor. The secret door gave without sound or strain. The high grass rustled against my hips as I jogged doubled over to use it as cover. In a stroke of added luck, clouds covered the auras of both moons as I made my way toward the cave. My fight with Johan loomed almost as prevalent in my mind as the presence of the demon and his minions. As short-term thinking went, my peer was the primary motivation for my journey. Any demon who bested my father would make short work of me, and even though increasing my power might someday aid in my revenge, I prioritized. Johan's entitled demeanor reminded me he came from the rich family of a high chancellor, and the convincing way his partner in crime, Elrin, had lured me into his confidence, then betrayed me, seemed to indicate the same. I might not know which of them was the alpha hyena, but treating them with equal caution and disdain would suit. Something rustled in the foliage to my left. My shoulders jerked. I dropped to my knees, then scanned the area. The thin stalks of grass surrounding me leaned in a light wind, and I couldn't tell if someone was sneaking around following me. I closed my eyes, listened to the wind, then tuned it out to focus on any sounds beneath, but I heard nothing. Did low demons scurry about? Waiting for them to pounce wasn't wise, but running around defenseless was equally stupid. My staff slid from the sheath with some effort, and clutching it in my grasp did surprisingly little to assuage my fears. I was suddenly aware of the frigid breeze blowing through my hair, but I wouldn't be standing around long enough to tie it off. This was serious. While I could name every vermin or threat within a square mile of the farm where I grew up, this field could harbor dangers I hadn't imagined. An unfamiliar variety of venomous snake, tigers creeping low for squishy prey like me. My back bent like before. I swung at the high weeds and ran as fast as my legs would carry me. Noises behind brought my head around every few seconds, and I even turned once or twice to make sure no one pursued. By Solara's grace, I finally exited the high weeds at the clearing before the cave. Its black mouth gaped like a great beast ready to swallow me despite the clarity lent by my seeing enhancement. A strange flicker of motion caught my eye, so I scurried to the left, coming around from the side of the cave. When I peeked around the corner of a rock jutting from the face of the hill, the strange distortion flickering on the wall was still there. Is that? I disabled my seeing spell. The scene burst into better light, literally. A fire burned just around the corner of the cave. The way the rocky ceiling dipped low as it progressed toward the back allowed the smoke to drift out of the mouth, then up, where the breeze caught it and carried it away. Who was burning a fire in my cave? Visions of inflamed tomes and scrolls sent a silent shriek of horror through my head. I lurched forward, then recalled my sentiments of moments before about unknown threats. One who could build a fire could prove every bit as perilous a challenge as a creature with claws and fangs. After a few tentative steps inside, I peeked around the corner. My heart lurched, and when I skittered backward, I tripped over my own feet. When my backside hit the loose dirt of the cave floor, I counted myself lucky I'd had the wherewithal to maintain my grasp on the staff, even if my butt paid for it with hard impact. Shocks of discomfort rattled up my spine from my tailbone as I waited for the hulking figure I'd just seen to appear. When it didn't, I gathered my breath, rose, then set myself against the wall. As I peeked around the corner this time, I winked my eyes in succession and reminded myself to do it more often. After all, familiarity with the world was prudent considering my proficiency for making enemies. Rock Troll. Giant humanoids known for their strength. Rock trolls are often used as slave labor in Middle Rubal. Level 14. No class selected. Melee power rating, 28. Melee defense rating, 32. Ranged power rating, 6. Ranged defense rating, 4. Magic power rating, 1. Magic resistance rating, 5. Although the muscular troll's rating suffered when compared to the ones I'd seen when I analyzed my father in his final moments, they dwarfed those of every student I'd analyzed at the academy. Johan Tur's melee power rating had only been 8. He was level 5. Shabana's MPR was a tick higher at 10, even though she was 1 level lower. But this beast was level 14, and I didn't want to learn from personal experience how his stats reflected its strength. Although it sat in the very stone casting shadows over the spot where I'd buried all the scrolls and the few tomes I could read, there was no sign he'd discovered them. The only addition to the space was a long wooden spear leaning against the side of his stone seat and a pair of ragged boots just inches from the fire. He peeled the skin off a bright orange piece of fruit, then bit into the flesh beneath. So much for retrieving the scrolls. If the troll was passing through, I'd retrieved them later. I'd seen no sign of a fire before, so that was likely. But if he'd found a new home, I had problems. When I backed out of the cave, a rustling came from the rear. The wind blew into my ears so I couldn't hear anything. There'd be no waiting around to see if he'd heard me. I sped toward the town wall, allowing the grass I'd missed with my twisting staff to slash across my face without care. Motion from my right brought my head around, and with the clouds having retreated from the moons, I caught the sight of long, white fangs flying through the air toward me. No! I brought my staff around in a wild swing, matched with the reflexive dip of my waist to avoid the incoming attack. It whiffed the air. Paws slammed into me, driving me back. 2 landed on my chest, forcing my breath through my mouth and into the wind. I heaved, but the weight threatened to suffocate me as the wide jaws of a beast snapped down at my face. I didn't know how I managed to get my staff under its neck, but my strained effort proved the lone thing between me and an early reunion with my father. My arms burned with resistance. My shoulders threatened to tear from their sockets under the weight. But I growled back at the beast and forced the staff up with all I had. Plainswolf. While most wolves travel in packs, plainswolves are a territorial and competitive breed that often end up going it alone. Level 9 Beast. Melee power rating 17. Melee defense rating 7. Ranged power rating 1. Ranged defense rating 1. Magic power rating 1. Magic resistance rating 1. My mouth gaped wide as a shrill scream ejected from my throat. The wolf jerked its head back, then twisted sideways to escape the upward force of my weapon. I struggled to keep my staff under its neck. The beast jumped to the side, lowered its head, then lunged toward the side of my face. I pushed one end of the staff in its direction. A lucky strike caught it in its upper teeth. You attack Plainswolf. Hit. Plainswolf. -8 HP. 92% HP remaining. Your melee attack skill has reached rank 4. Your staff skill has reached rank 10. The wolf retreated but quickly recovered. I rolled away, then fumbled to my knees as it launched again. With renewed gusto, I swung the staff and imagined the scent of my own blood dribbling from the beast's mouth. You attack, Plainswolf. Miss. The momentum of my overswing caused me to tumble, and it was only by that stroke of luck the wolf sailed by. Stopping to look could have finished me, so I suppressed the urge and rolled to one side. In a second, I was back on my feet, whirling around to locate the threat. The Plainswolf hunched low. I couldn't hear over the breeze whipping the weeds, but the way it sneered, revealing its long white teeth in all their glory, it almost certainly growled. Muscle memory made me pivot and present a smaller target as my father had taught me. The wolf jumped to one side, then barked. The strange yip carrying over the wind sounded out of place from such a husky beast, but chills reverberated through my spine nonetheless. This thing is going to kill you if you don't get away. And run where? I muttered to myself. Although I'd had the wherewithal to carry my staff, I hadn't brought the knife my father insisted I carry everywhere. I'd always thought of it as a tool to cut away the skin of animals we'd bested in the woods, not a weapon to bring them down. I didn't want to fight close enough to use it, but if the wolf got me on my back again, I'd have wished I'd brought it. Always carry your knife. The wolf launched again. A white light created a momentary halo around its body. I twisted away, but its claw raked my shoulder at the last moment. Plainswolf uses lunging strike. Hit. Minus 54 HP. 77% health remaining. Minus 17 HP bleed. 71% health remaining. Hot hell raged through the muscle, blood pooled inside the cloth. The hand attached to that arm trembled, then lost its grip on the staff. The wolf seized the advantage, rushing in low and clamping down on one ankle. This time, its jaws flashed bright white light. Plainswolf uses bite, minus 10 HP, 65% health remaining. I lost my footing and tumbled onto my back. The animal clawed up my body until its yellow eyes glowed in the light of the moons just inches from mine. I struggled to yank my staff across my chest, but my injured arm and stony fingers wouldn't cooperate. The wolf's jaws bore down and tore my robe where my shoulder bled. A horrifying explosion of pain shuddered up my neck and down my arm. One side of my torso went numb. Plainwolf attacks. Critical hit. Minus 98 HP. 22% health remaining. Minus 10 HP bleed. My health meter flashed red, white, then red again. Warning, you have dropped below 20% health. The wolf spat a clump of meaty cloth, then lowered its head toward my chin. It growled low, and the pain tearing through my body caused me to invite the coming quiet of death. Anything to end that torment. It turned its head sideways to get a good grasp on my throat, but stopped inches short. The beast yelped, then rose high as if a twister had lifted it. Two massive arms formed a V around the wolf. Then the beast cut an arc through the air. It came down in a crunch of bones. Unknown rock troll uses backbreaker. Critical hit. Mortal wound. Plainswolf. Minus 92 HP. Plainswolf has died. You earn 137 XP for your contribution. I coughed, rolled away, and somehow struggled to my feet. When I turned, the troll towered over me, grasping the wolf by the scruff of its neck in one massive fist. My ankle gave and I almost fell. Then the troll reached his free hand toward me. Pain or no pain, I'd had enough. The cold wind on my face and the shrieking pain in my shoulder woke me from the acceptance of my demise moments earlier. Before I knew what was happening, I was limping furiously through the grass, my staff somehow clutched in the one hand that could grasp it, my eyes locked onto the wall of Warrington. Although my vision was fuzzy with tears, I ventured a glance to find the giant hoisting the wolf onto its shoulder, following me only with its gaze. Minus 10 HP bleed, 18% health remaining. The words rolled before my eyes in warning that my life would soon end, but I was no longer ready to accept that fate. The wolf had gotten the better of me, but the troll hadn't pursued. My father's words echoed on the wind.
Find Drasen Welling. He will see to your training.
I was already seeing to my training, Drasen Welling or not. More importantly, I was my father's daughter, and I would not die out here in the cold just to have my bones stripped clean by wolves. The hidden door resisted re-entry, so I put my good shoulder into the exercise. When it gave, I tumbled inside, repetitive lines of text stacked before my eyes when I rolled onto my back. -10 HP bleed, 12% health remaining. I rolled to my knees. The world gave a violent tilt. I toppled into the second door, then dropped my staff to grab its latch. When the weapon clattered to the floor, the sound was distant, as if it had found its resting place across the room. The door opened. I reached back for my staff, then tried to rise. No matter how I grasped the wall to steady myself, I couldn't find balance. My knees carried me through lost time. Then, I was at the foot of the ladder. But as I grasped the lowest rung from the floor, my strength was gone, and I knew my struggle was over. -10 HP, 9% health remaining.